She drove off a cliff in 2016, and everyone saw it on camera. No body, no wreck, just ocean. 7 years later, her car washed ashore 300 miles away. And inside it was something that couldn't have been hers. What police found next rewrote everything they thought they knew. But first, let's go back to the beginning. On the morning of March 3, 2016, 27-year-old Danielle Reeds left her apartment in Marina, California at exactly 7:05 a.m. She texted her manager at the animal clinic where she worked, saying she was running 10 minutes late but on her way. She always followed the same route, Highway 1 northbound, a stretch of twisting coastline carved into the cliffs above the Pacific. Traffic that morning was light. The weather was gray and still. At 7:15 a.m., a white Ford pickup driving behind a bend near Devil's Point had a dash cam running. It caught only a few seconds, but enough. Danielle's dark blue 2010 Subaru Outback swerved slightly left, cut across the shoulder, and without braking or veering, went straight over the guardrail and out of frame. The driver who captured the footage pulled over immediately and called 911. By the time rescue units arrived, there was no trace of the car, no floating debris, no signs of oil, fuel, or movement in the water. Search and rescue teams spent the next 3 days scanning the coastline. Helicopters, boats, sonar scans along the cliff base. What they found was minimal. A torn backpack later confirmed to be Danielle's, part of her front bumper lodged between 2 rocks, and a single sneaker. The rest was gone. The ocean off that part of the coast is deep, cold, and fast. Experts said if the car had landed at the right angle and caught the current, it could have been pulled straight into the underwater trench that drops off just half a mile offshore. Danielle's parents, Lydia and Walter Reeds, were devastated, but resigned. By the end of the week, she was presumed dead. Her body was never recovered. Her death certificate listed accidental loss of vehicle control, presumed drowned. But some things never sat right. Danielle was a cautious driver. She hated cliffs. She always took the inner lane and avoided sharp turns. She never sped, and more than that, she had a strict morning routine, coffee at the same drive-thru, a phone call to her mom between 7:10 and 7:20. That day there was no coffee receipt, no call, no Bluetooth connection, no GPS history from her phone after 7:06. The phone itself was never found. Investigators reviewed the dashcam footage over and over. There was no indication of braking, no swerving, no sign that she had tried to stop. The Subaru simply drifted off the edge. The curve was tight, but not dangerous at normal speed. The guardrail was old, but it had stopped other vehicles before. But this time, it didn't even look like she turned the wheel. Still, without hard evidence, the case closed quietly. Her parents held a memorial in April. No funeral, no remains, just flowers and a framed photo. Life moved on. The highway was repaired. The curve at Devil's Point became just another marker on the coastal map. Years passed. Every now and then, the family received a tip from someone claiming to have seen a car like Danielle's or a woman who looked like her. None of them led anywhere. Private investigators found nothing. Insurance paid out. The VIN number was added to the National Registry as unrecovered. And then, in the spring of 2023, everything changed. On the morning of March 11th, almost 7 years to the day since Danielle disappeared, a fisherman named Steve Talbot was walking along a desolate stretch of beach in Mendocino County. It was early, the tide just beginning to pull back. He noticed something strange sticking out of the sand. At first he thought it was a large piece of driftwood. Then he saw the wheel, then the glass, the front end of a vehicle, badly rusted but unmistakable, was jutting up from the wet sand, half buried, tilted on its side. He called 911. Deputies from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office responded within the hour. The vehicle had no front plate, but the rear was still partially attached. The plate was California 2010 registration, and when the sand was cleared away, the match was confirmed. It was Danielle Reed's Subaru Outback. There were no visible signs of damage from impact. The body was corroded but intact. The windows were sealed. The front cabin was strangely preserved. The car looked as if it had been underwater for years, and yet somehow wasn't crushed, wasn't mangled, wasn't torn apart by time or salt. The Subaru had traveled nearly 300 miles north, against prevailing coastal current patterns, and reappeared without warning. It was pulled out slowly by winch and taken to a secure facility for examination. What was inside the car would change everything, and it would prove Danielle was never alone in that vehicle. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. on March 11, 2023. The man on the line, a local fisherman named Steve Talbot, was calm but clearly unsettled. He said he was walking along a stretch of beach just south of 10 Mile River in Mendocino County when he saw the front end of a vehicle buried in the sand. At first, he thought it was wreckage from a boat or shipping container, but as the tide pulled back, he could see the unmistakable curve of a windshield and a faded California license plate. The responding deputies were on scene by 7:25. By then, the front half of the vehicle was fully exposed, leaning on its passenger side at a slight angle. Barnacles clung to the lower panels. The headlights were opaque with corrosion, but intact. The plate was barely legible through the grime. The number matched a vehicle reported missing 7 years ago, a dark blue 2010 Subaru Outback belonging to Danielle Reed's. She had driven off a cliff near Devil's Point, over 280 miles south of where the car now sat. At the time, her car had vanished completely. No oil slick, no debris field, no confirmation of impact. Experts said the current might have pulled the wreckage west into deep water, but no one expected it to wash up on shore, and certainly not intact. This wasn't a rusted-out cage of twisted steel. This was a mostly preserved vehicle, sealed shut by silt and pressure, resting in the sand like it had simply waited to be found. The car was extracted carefully by a flatbed tow rig and taken to a secure garage used by the Mendocino Sheriff's Office. It was there that things got even stranger. Forensics officers began a standard sweep: photographs, serial number checks, a quick visual inventory. The tires had long since deflated, but all 4 were still attached. The back bumper was dented. The roof had signs of corrosion. But the windows? All intact. No breaks. No evidence of impact. They opened the driver's door first. It resisted. The interior was damp, but not flooded. The seats were stained, the upholstery torn from years of pressure and salt air, but the front cabin had clearly been airtight for a long time. The glove box was shut. The floor mats were warped. A rusted key was still in the ignition. Then they opened the back. At first glance, the cargo space was empty. Just a few scraps of fabric, some algae, a warped first aid kit. But when one of the techs lifted the floor panel above the spare tire well, they found something that had no business being there. A duffel bag, black, nylon, molded to the shape of the space it had been compressed into. They pulled it out slowly. It was heavy, zipper still intact. Inside were 3 items. The first was a pair of size 13 men's sneakers, caked in dry salt. The second was a brown leather wallet containing $43 in cash, a Safeway card, and an Oregon State ID. The name on the ID, James Kyle Dorsey, born 1980. No relation to Danielle, no prior record, no known connection. The third item was what stopped everyone cold. A small, handheld voice recorder, cracked on one side, rusted around the mic port, but still visibly marked with a yellow sticker labeled March 2nd. Forensics didn't open it right away. It was taken to the county lab for delicate handling. Meanwhile, A national database search pulled up James Dorsey's name in connection with a missing persons report filed in 2016, 5 months after Danielle's disappearance. Dorsey had been reported missing by his landlord in Eureka, just over 100 miles from the location where Danielle's car was found. He hadn't paid rent in weeks, and his apartment had been left unlocked. There was no sign of struggle, just a duffel bag missing from his closet. He had disappeared without a trace. No one had ever connected his case to Danielle's, until now. Investigators revisited the original crash footage from the dashcam in 2016. They looked again at the moment Danielle's Subaru crossed the shoulder and launched over the cliff. The resolution wasn't great, but now they had something new to look for. A second figure, a shadow, a passenger. They ran filters, brightness, frame-by-frame analysis, and for the first time in 7 years, they saw something they hadn't before. Just one flicker, one blur of motion from the passenger side window. It wasn't proof, but it was enough, because Danielle's car hadn't gone over that cliff empty, and she hadn't been alone. The recorder was sent to a forensics audio lab in Sacramento. Technicians were cautious. It was an old model, a digital unit from the early 2000s, but the battery housing was intact. The memory chip had oxidized in several spots, but they managed to extract the file labeled REC0302. It was just under 26 minutes long. The timestamp matched March 2, 2016, one day before Danielle's supposed crash. The audio began with road noise, a car door shutting, distant waves, then a woman's voice, clearly Danielle's, breathing hard. Not panicked, but nervous. She says something softly. "I know this isn't right." There's a pause, then a second voice, male, calm, slightly hoarse, later matched through voice print analysis to James Kyle Dorsey. He responds, "Just tell me what you saw. That's all I need." Danielle says nothing for almost 20 seconds. Then, "He was following me again. He knew where I parked. He knew where I lived. I didn't tell anyone but him. He just vanished." The man asks her again, "You told the police?" She answers, "They said there was no evidence, that I was projecting, but the window was broken. He was in my place." The next few minutes are static and faint breathing. It's unclear whether the car is moving. Then Danielle says something that pulls the entire case into new territory. "He made copies. He had my second key. I know it. He knew everything about my schedule." James says, "Did you see him the night before?" Danielle replies, "Yes. At the overpass. Same coat. Just watching. He didn't move. I drove right past him." The audio becomes harder to make out. Wind. Tires on wet pavement. Then the man speaks again, closer to the mic this time. He says, "Look, if this is what you want to do, you don't get to stop halfway." Danielle whispers, "I'm not going over." He says, "Then give it to me, and I'll finish it." That's where the audio ends. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was more than enough to reopen Danielle's case. Not as a traffic fatality, but as a probable abduction and staged disappearance. What investigators now believed was this: Danielle had been scared. She had been stalked. She had spoken with someone, James Dorsey, possibly as a confidant, possibly as something more complicated. And together, or under pressure, they had planned something, whether it was to hide, to escape, to make someone believe she was gone. No one knew for sure, but the fact remained. After that audio was recorded, both of them vanished. The new working theory was that the car was driven, or pushed, into the ocean deliberately. It had rolled off the cliff on a quiet stretch of road during a time with no witnesses except one passing vehicle that captured the moment on a dash cam. No one saw what happened before. No one saw who was inside. And now that the vehicle had been recovered 7 years later, in a location far beyond where natural current could plausibly take it, there was another possibility. Someone had moved the vehicle, not the ocean. The FBI was brought in by early April. Oceanographic specialists reviewed tidal maps, drift patterns, and current speeds. The distance between Devil's Point and the beach in Mendocino where the car washed up exceeded what was physically possible without intervention. The only realistic explanation? The vehicle had been submerged somewhere else entirely, stored, hidden, relocated, then either dumped near shore or intentionally positioned to be found. That meant someone had access to the vehicle long after the presumed crash. Someone had kept it hidden, sealed, possibly as leverage, possibly to erase it. But something had changed, and that something came to light 2 weeks later. A delivery driver reported a squatter's shack half a mile from the beach, tucked behind an abandoned ranger station. Inside was a rotting mattress, 2 propane tanks, and a shortwave radio, still working. There was a second voice recorder on the table, but this one had been smashed, as if on purpose. Next to it, buried in a coffee tin, was a photograph. It showed Danielle, hair wet, sitting in what looked like a cheap motel room, alive, pale, wearing clothes she wasn't last seen in. On the back, a date was scribbled in pen, 2019, 3 years after she vanished, 2 years before her car surfaced, and someone had taken that photo. Someone had kept her alive. The question now wasn't just what happened the morning she drove off the cliff. It was how long she'd stayed hidden, and why. The photo changed everything. Until that moment, Danielle Reeds had been considered either a victim of misadventure or part of a failed escape plan. But now there was proof. Not speculation, not a witness report, but physical evidence. She was alive in 2019, 3 years after she supposedly died. FBI agents scanned the image for details. The bed frame was metal. The window had no curtains. The plug outlet was cracked and yellowed, the kind common in motels built in the 70s. A partial receipt was visible in the corner. It had the logo of a chain motel located along the 101 corridor in northern Humboldt County. Agents cross-referenced electricity usage for abandoned properties in the area. They looked for gaps in surveillance logs, cross-matched them with facial recognition from surrounding highway cams. Then came a break. A parking citation was issued in late 2020 to a maroon Ford Bronco parked outside a remote laundromat in Eureka. The ticket had a name, not Danielle's but James Dorsey's. The same name on the ID found inside the duffel bag in her recovered car. It had been flagged at the time, but no one had followed up. Now it placed Dorsey alive, mobile, and in the area years after both he and Danielle had supposedly vanished. Agents canvassed the area. Locals remembered the Bronco. Some recalled a quiet man who came in every few weeks, kept to himself, paid cash, bought non-perishable food and old phone cards. He was seen with a woman once, someone in a hoodie who waited in the car. That was all they had. Fragments. But the trail was getting warmer. By the end of May 2023, they had narrowed his last known residence to an abandoned hunting cabin off a gravel road outside Willow Creek. When agents arrived, it had already been cleared out. Mattress gone. Supplies missing. Only a burned trash pit remained behind the cabin. Inside the ash, they found melted fragments of hard plastic, a scorched phone battery, and what remained of a small Polaroid camera. It had been destroyed intentionally, but not before something had been removed. There were drag marks near the door, tire tracks, fresh. Whoever had been there had left days, maybe hours, before. The footprint pattern suggested 2 people, one larger, one barefoot. They followed the tracks north and lost them near the river. At this point, the investigation shifted. The case wasn't about a missing woman. It was about 2 people who had lived off-grid, silently, deliberately, for nearly a decade, until someone made a mistake. And that mistake, investigators now believed, was the car. Someone had moved it. Someone had decided to let it be found. Whether it was Dorsey or Danielle, or both, no one could say for sure. But the location wasn't random. It was placed just close enough to civilization to be discovered, but just far enough that the timeline had started to rot. Forensics estimated the vehicle had only been in the water near Mendocino for a few weeks, meaning it had likely been submerged somewhere else for most of those 7 years, possibly in a private reservoir, a quarry, or a decommissioned boat ramp. Somewhere isolated. Somewhere quiet. The working theory became this. Danielle had been stalked. She had tried to report it. She felt unsafe. She either enlisted James Dorsey's help, or he initiated contact. Together they created a plan to disappear. Maybe it was a cry for help. Maybe it was an escape. But something went wrong, or something changed. Whether it was survival instinct, mental collapse, or coercion, they stayed hidden, for years, until the car was dumped, and the timeline collapsed. But then came the final piece. 6 months after the car was found, in November 2023, a trail runner near Crescent City spotted an old backpack caught in a tree root along the riverbank. Inside were wet clothes, canned food, and a laminated photo ID, newly issued. The name was fake. The birth date was altered. But the face wasn't. It was Danielle. A week later, a ranger found a small camp buried under a tarp in the brush nearby. Still warm, fire pit glowing, fresh footprints, no bodies, no arrests, no note. To this day, Danielle Reed's remains legally missing. Her death certificate was withdrawn. Her social security number reactivated. But no one has seen her. Not her parents, not her friends, not even investigators. The car washed up. The voices were real. The photo existed. But the woman at the center of it all simply vanished. Again. Only this time, it wasn't an accident. And maybe it never was.